You went to Home Depot last weekend. You picked up caulk, maybe a paintbrush. Some grout, you were in and out in 20 minutes. The receipt was under $40. The big project, the bathroom remodel. The deck, the kitchen floor. Still on the list, it has been on the list for a while now. You are not alone in that decision. Tens of millions of American homeowners made the exact same call this year. Small stuff, yes, big stuff. Not yet. On May 13, 2025, Home Depot reported its first quarter earnings. Headline sales looked almost fine. But buried inside those numbers was a split that the financial press mostly skimmed past. Transactions fell 5%. The number of people walking out with something in their cart dropped. But the average amount each person spent per item actually went up 0.7% according to Home Depot's own Q1 FY 2025 earnings release. Fewer trips, smaller baskets, higher price per item. That is not the pattern of a healthy consumer. That is the pattern of someone buying what they absolutely have to, and skipping everything else. Ted Decker, Home Depot CEO, said it plainly on the May earnings call. We continue to see customers taking on smaller projects and deferring larger, more discretionary spending. Deferring, that word is doing a lot of work in that sentence. There is a difference between a purchase you postponed and a cost you eliminated. Right now, across the American housing stock, those two things are being quietly confused for each other on a massive scale. By the end of this video, I am going to show you a specific number from a Harvard Housing Research report that reframes every small purchase you made at Home Depot this year and explains why the choice that felt responsible may be the most expensive decision you never knew you were making. The easy explanation writes itself. Inflation hit hard, consumers got cautious. Everyone pulled back, story over. Except the numbers don't cooperate. On May 13, 2025, Home Depot reported its Q1 FY 2025 results. Comparable sales were down 2.8%, transactions fell 3.5%. Those figures sound like a broad consumer retreat. People buying less of everything. Tightening across the board, that is the story most analysts reached for first. But then there is this. Average ticket was actually up 0.7%. Customers who did show up spent slightly more per visit than the year before. That is the opposite of how a general pullback behaves. When consumers genuinely panic, basket sizes shrink. Everything gets cut, cheap stuff and expensive stuff fall together. That is not what happened here. On the Q3 FY 2023 earnings call, back in November 2023, Home Depot's own management drew the line clearly. Quote, the big ticket comp was negative in the quarter, while small ticket was positive. That was not a blip. It was the beginning of a pattern that held through 2024 and into 2025. By February 2025, CFO Richard McPhail was still describing it the same way. Our pro customers remain under pressure as their project pipelines remain soft. Small purchases, caulk, paint, fasteners were holding, large project spending, flooring, cabinetry, full bathroom renovations, was not. So this is not a story about consumers being uniformly scared. This is a story about a specific category of spending that stopped. The split is clean, documented, and consistent across 6 consecutive quarters of earnings data. Which forces a harder question. If this were pure inflation anxiety, you would expect everything to soften together. But it didn't. Something is specifically killing the big ticket decision and leaving the small stuff untouched. So what exactly is the mechanism that separates a $40 tube of caulk from a $4,000 bathroom renovation? The answer is not what most people assume. Here is what actually changed. In March 2022, the Federal Reserve began raising interest rates from near zero. By July 2023, the federal funds rate hit 5.25%, the highest level since 2001. That decision, made in a Washington conference room, quietly detonated inside millions of American kitchens and bathrooms. The mechanism is a product most homeowners barely think about until they need it. The home equity line of credit. A HELOC lets you borrow against the value of your home to fund a renovation. In early 2022, those rates sat around 4%. By 2023 and into 2024, Federal Reserve H-15 data shows HELOC rates had climbed to 8 and 9%. The annual carrying cost of borrowing against your home equity had doubled. Run the math on $40,000 kitchen remodel at 4%. You're paying around $1,600 a year in interest. At 9%, that same debt costs you $3,600, same kitchen, same tile. Same cabinets, nearly $2,000 more per year, just to borrow the money. So the project sits unstarted. The estimate stays folded in a drawer. This is the real split Home Depot's numbers are showing. Small purchases like caulk, paintbrushes, a new faucet don't require financing. You pull $20 from your wallet and the problem is handled. But a kitchen remodel, a bathroom gut, a new roof, those require a loan. And right now that loan is expensive. Richard McPhail, Home Depot CFO, said it plainly on the Q4 FY 2024 earnings call in February 2025. Our pro customers remain under pressure as their project pipelines remain soft. Professional contractors aren't booking big jobs because homeowners aren't signing the paperwork. This is not consumer fear. This is consumer math. But here is where the story shifts into something darker. Every household making this rational calculation, skip the big project and buy the caulk instead, is making the same choice simultaneously. Millions of them on the same streets. So what actually happens to a house and a neighborhood when everyone defers the same repairs at the same time? Here is the thing nobody in the financial press said out loud after the May 13th earnings call. The freeze did not stop at the homeowner. On February 25, 2025, Home Depot CFO Richard McPhail told analysts something that reframed the entire story. Our pro customers remain under pressure as their project pipelines remain soft. Read that again slowly. Not consumers, professionals, the contractors, landlords and property managers who write the largest checks, who keep the building supply desks busy, who turn a single job into 40 line items went quiet too. This changes everything. The story in chapters 2 and 3 was about a homeowner doing the math on a HELOC at 9% and deciding to buy caulk instead of calling a contractor. That story made sense. Rational people respond to price signals. But contractors do not defer because their own borrowing costs went up. They defer because the phone stopped ringing. The homeowner's freeze became the contractor's drought. By Q1 FY 2025, Home Depot's transaction count had fallen 5%. The Pro Desk, the counter where contractors place bulk orders before a job starts, was sitting empty. A contractor with a blank calendar does not order lumber. A property manager staring at a water stain on the ceiling, doing the math on vacancy rates, files it under monitor. The job never gets scheduled. Materials never get ordered. The physical work simply does not happen. This is no longer a consumer sentiment story. It is a supply chain freeze that runs from the homeowner's decision all the way to the lumber yard. And here is where it gets genuinely strange. Home Depot's average ticket actually rose 0.7% in Q1 FY 2025, according to their earnings release. Fewer trips, smaller jobs, but each visit costs a little more. The caulk and the paintbrush and the grout held. The structural work vanished. So millions of American homes are sitting right now with deferred projects. Aging rooftops, cracked siding, slow leaks. The professionals who would fix them have empty calendars. The question is what that actually costs. The answer is not what anyone expects. Remember that receipt from the beginning of this video. Caulk, a paint roller, light bulbs. Under $40, it felt responsible. Here is the number that reframes it. Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies found that every dollar of deferred home maintenance costs $3 to $5 to fix within 5 years. Not because prices rise, because small problems become structural ones. The crack in the grout becomes water intrusion. The water intrusion becomes rot. The rot becomes a floor replacement. One skipped repair quietly multiplies into something that requires a contractor, a permit, and a number at the bottom of an estimate that changes your expression. That ratio is not a projection. It is a documented pattern across the American housing stock. Published in Harvard's December 2024 Improving America's Housing Report. Millions of households made the same rational short-term decision simultaneously. Skip the big project by the caulk. Wait for rates to drop. Each decision made perfect individual sense. Collectively, they are loading the American housing stock with compounding deferred maintenance debt that does not care what Jerome Powell does next. The caulk was never the solution. It was the delay. A $500 repair deferred for 5 years does not stay $500. It becomes $2,500 minimum, and that is before a contractor tells you what they found underneath. Ted Decker said on May 13th that customers are taking on smaller projects and deferring larger, more discretionary spending, what he described as a spending pattern. Harvard describes as a structural accumulation. Those two things are the same event, measured from opposite ends. The small purchase felt like discipline. The Harvard number says it was the opening move in a much more expensive sequence, playing out quietly across every rooftop on every street, all at once. Subscribe, a new breakdown like this every day.